But first, there has been a major development for Australians who have been standing up to Russia after the invasion of Ukraine.
News journalists are among 121 Australians blacklisted indefinitely by Russia. Sky News host Andrew Bolt and our political reporter Jonathan Lee join other Australian journalists, prominent media and business executives and government officials. Andrew Bolt, who also writes a column for the Herald Sun, called for the Russian leader to be assassinated by one of his rivals over his illegal invasion of Ukraine and subsequent war crimes and atrocities.
Yes, Australian journalists have been targeted with sanctions by Russia and placed on indefinite ban lists. Now, that's a sobering list to be on when we know that dictator Vladimir Putin has killed at least 21 journalists since coming to power in 2000. Interestingly, the term Russophobic has been flagged as the Kremlin's justification for these new sanctions. So why is Putin so angry at Aussie journalists that you see every day on your TV screens? Well, Australia has been actively supporting Ukrainian troops and citizens and provided $65 million in humanitarian relief. Short of actively sending our own soldiers to Ukraine, Australia is also sending the country armour combat vehicles known as Bushmasters. Now, this show of public support for the Ukrainians and the targeted relief for millions of Ukrainian refugees makes Putin's invasion more difficult. But the Kremlin's real gripe is with the flow of information. You would have seen countless stories like this article from Fox News in March explaining why the information war, especially the one at home in Russia, is so crucial for Putin. And note this paragraph. The BBC also claimed on Wednesday that millions of Russians have tuned into the BBC in order to get factual, independent information about the war. BBC.com supposedly saw 10.7 million views on its Russian language news website, triple its year-to-date weekly average. Well, millions of Russians are finding a way to access Western media who are learning about what the rest of the world thinks about their dear leader. That puts domestic pressure on Putin that he won't like. And here at Sky News, our colleague Andrew Bolt has been offering blistering commentary on Vladimir Putin's invasion.
This Tuesday marks 3 months to the day that Russian President Vladimir Putin made the mistake that destroyed Russia as a superpower. 3 months to the day that Putin ordered 2/3 of the Russian army to invade Ukraine and replace its government, something he thought would take, 3-4 days. Instead, for 3 months now, his mighty army has been smashed, torn apart by the Ukrainian army, humiliated, outthought and outfought. Britain's Defence Ministry, in fact, estimates that a quarter of the Russian army in Ukraine has now been made inoperative. And that includes many of Russia's elite forces and best equipment.
That was Andrew Bolt just 3 weeks ago before he found himself banned and sanctioned by this evil despot. And this tells me one thing. We need to keep up the pressure with our Russian coverage. Well, helping me cut through the big stories of the week is author Kel Richards and CEO of Recastled, Kosher Garda. Kel, why don't we start with you? I know you're a wordsmith and you love the origins of words. Russophobic, this new term the Kremlin is using to disparage these journalists who have been critical. What do you make of that?
Phobia comes from the Greek word for fear. So calling anything phobic means you're saying people are doing it because they're afraid of you. The trend for doing that began in the 1970s, and the very first word that was coined was homophobic. So the idea, it was when the gay community was arguing anyone who disapproves of us or dislikes us is doing it because they're afraid of us. Now, it was never a good claim to make, because people will oppose groups for lots of different reasons. Fear doesn't always come into it. But that was their strategy. It caught on. So the phobic thing has now been used elsewhere. So if you think that big beefy blokes with XY chromosomes should be stopped from competing against girls with XS chromosomes, you are transphobic. You're doing it because you're afraid of something. clearly it becomes more and more absurd, doesn't it? Now, the idea that a bunch of journalists in Australia are doing this because they're afraid of Russia is clearly a nonsense claim, but it's a very trendy verbal construction. What I don't understand is how Mad Vlad of Moscow is so trendy that he's caught up with a trendy way of expressing the thing.
Yeah, well, Kosher, I mean, he makes a really interesting point, doesn't it? You know what they're doing, that they're stealing these Western terms, these terms that are very, common and popular, particularly among progressive activists, the phobia, and using it, spinning it back as part of his propaganda.
Yes, and look, he comes out of the KGB, and they are masters of stagecraft and of, linguistic warfare, information warfare. So this is straight out of that playbook. I also think that it's sort of a symbolic counterpunch against all the various economic sanctions and other symbolic sanctions that the Western sphere has placed against him. But I think, the one reality I would say, not to break rank per se, Jack, but in this, even as a Western media is continuing to apply this pressure and should continue to do so for sure. I don't think anyone's going to miss the ability to not be able to travel to Russia anytime soon. It is not representative of many other important markets that Russia deals with. So while it is coming out of the Western sphere, countries like China, like India, like Brazil that are important markets, their media is covering this differently, and their public policy actually has been different and not fully in alignment with the West. And so that does give sort of an escape valve in these information warfare games to Putin and the people of Russia, to the extent that they consume media from those countries and not just the Western sphere.
That's a very good point. And I find the whole information, the control of information, which is, the number one game in a situation like this, so interesting, because in Russia, obviously, they still have a very tight control of information on state media. And the way that I see this, it's, these journalists are creeping into the ecosphere slightly, and that is what becomes problematic for them. They can't control what is said outside and how that then finds its way and proliferates into their ecosystem.
I think that's on the money. Someone said to me once, you've got to bear in mind that Vladimir Putin started as a KGB thug, as Kosher said, and he is still a KGB thug. It's the way his mind works. So the idea that anyone can say whatever they think and have free speech horrifies someone like Putin, and he says they've got to be stopped. I think it's interesting that in this day and age, the way media has now spread is it can't be done. It is really hard, even in a repressive country like Russia, even in China, it is really hard to stop these independent, free voices being heard. So it's great that they are. I mean, it does. Andrew Bolt might have to put his Dachau on the Black Sea on the market because he can't go there anymore. I mean, it's ridiculous, but it tells us they're a bit concerned and they're a bit worried, and that's good. Isn't it nice to know they're worried?
Couldn't agree more.